Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. When my husband Thomas and I came across the charming two-bedroom cottage tucked away in the lush countryside, it seemed like the perfect place to start our new life together. The real estate agent had described it as a lovely little fixer-upper with tons of potential, and she wasn't wrong. The stone and timber cottage had lovely bones, but was definitely in need of some TLC. However, the peaceful rural location, surrounded by rolling green hills and woods, was ideal, far enough from the bustle of the city to feel pleasantly remote, but still close enough to commute if we ever needed. And the reasonable price was right in line with our limited budget as newlyweds. After years of squeezing into tiny rented flats in crowded, noisy neighborhoods, I was positively giddy at the prospect of having space to stretch out and make our own. On moving day, we arrived with a large truck bursting with boxes and hand-me-down furniture. As Thomas and I labored to carry everything into the empty cottage, I took a moment to take it all in. The cozy living room was centered around a massive stone fireplace that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. The kitchen was compact but charming, with a cute little breakfast nook that caught the morning sun. My footsteps echoed off the creaky hardwood floors as I explored the two modest bedrooms upstairs beneath the sloped ceilings. Peeled wallpaper and worn carpets hinted at the home's age and neglected state, but I had a vision for restoring it. This adorable cottage needed love and elbow grease to be turned into the perfect home for us. I felt giddy with excitement and possibility. That first night, exhausted from a full day of lugging and unpacking, we ordered curry takeaway and ate while sitting cross-legged amidst the boxes and mess on the living room floor. After dinner, I soaked in a long hot bath in the clawfoot tub, while Thomas got a fire crackling in the massive fireplace. We snuggled under fresh sheets in the larger bedroom upstairs, leaving the smaller room to tackle later as a guest room or office. Lying there in Thomas' arms in our very own home, I felt safe, peaceful, and optimistic for our future together. This charming cottage was a dream come true. Over the next week, in between our regular work, Thomas and I diligently tackled DIY projects to renovate and personalize the dated cottage. We stripped away hideous floral wallpaper, sanded and restained the scuffed hardwood floors, and ripped up tattered old linoleum carpeting. At night, sweaty and sore but satisfied, we collapsed into bed pleased with the progress. There was so much still to do, but gradually the cottage was coming to life and becoming ours. About 2 weeks after moving in, I started noticing peculiar sounds and occurrences when I was home alone. I hear heavy creaking footsteps from the empty bedroom upstairs, as if someone was walking around up there. At first, I assumed it was an odd structural sound or the wind outside causing the noise, but it persisted always when I was by myself. I'd also hear knocks and thuds inside the walls, as if something was moving hidden between the plaster. Though subtle and sporadic, the sounds left me unsettled. When I told Thomas about it, he dismissed my concerns and insisted old houses naturally make odd noises as they settle. Not wanting to seem paranoid, I let it go, but deep down I couldn't shake the niggling feeling something wasn't right. At night, the troubling sounds continued. Rustling and heavy footsteps would wake me up, coming from the vacant bedroom above ours. I'd lie frozen in the dark listening intently until the sound ceased and exhaustion overtook me. Thomas started sleeping through it all, but I struggled badly. Then one dreadfully vivid night, I was startled awake by the definite creak of footsteps racing up the stairs. Our closed bedroom door suddenly rattled violently as if someone was desperately trying to enter. Without hesitation, I shook Thomas awake and made him investigate. Of course, he found nothing amiss and no intruder, but the door had clearly rattled. After that, Thomas took my concerns more seriously. I became extremely reluctant to spend time alone at the house as the eerie activity continued. I started avoiding the cottage during the day, working at coffee shops or running mundane errands, as I felt increasingly unsettled there by myself. At night, I'd lie rigidly awake, ears straining to analyze every faint sound. I knew I wasn't imagining things, and something had to be done. I started asking around, determined to understand what was happening in our home. The previous owners hadn't reported anything odd before selling it to us, but after some gentle probing, our elderly neighbor who'd lived down the road forever finally opened up about the cottage's troubled history. Decades prior, there had been 2 tragic deaths in the larger bedroom upstairs, one from illness and the other mysteriously in his sleep. While disturbing, this didn't fully explain the footsteps and knocks only I seemed to hear. Palmas finally agreed we could try blessing the house and purging any lingering spirits. After smudging the entire cottage with sage, the activity quieted for a few days, but soon returned louder and more persistent than before. My attempts to cleanse the home had failed. Whatever presence occupied the cottage clearly had no intention of leaving. As much as I had wanted to make the charming cottage our forever home, the sinister activity made that impossible. I refused to live in a haunted house. Thomas and I had to break our lease early, and I immediately felt at peace in our new, modern home together. In the end, we never understood for sure what haunted that lovely country cottage, but I trust what I heard and felt. Some places hold energies we can't see, but still sense if we pay attention. For my own well-being, I had no choice but to leave. After years of squeezed into tiny, noisy flat chairs with strangers, I was positively euphoric when I finally found a place of my own in London. It was a modest 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a historic converted building, with reasonable rent that just barely fit my modest budget. The elderly landlady described it as snug, which sounded much nicer than cramped. To me, it felt perfect. Of course, the compact apartment needed some cosmetic upgrades. Fresh paint, modern fixtures, thorough scrubbing of the grimy floors, and the long, narrow stairwells reeked strongly of Indian takeaway and cigarette smoke. But I saw potential, and with my handy DIY skills, I was eager to transform it into a stylish urban oasis amidst the surrounding chaos of the city. After a stressful move-in day lugging heavy furniture up 3 flights, I happily curled up in my lumpy second-hand bed that first night, peaceful and content in my new home. The next morning, fueled by excited first day in my own place adrenaline, I was up at dawn unpacking boxes and organizing in the open concept living room/kitchen. Around mid-morning, the screech of the doorbell startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no one ever rang my bell those first days, since hardly anyone knew my new address. Puzzled, I buzzed the visitor into the building, assuming it must be a delivery I'd forgotten about. But when I opened my front door, there sat only a plain white envelope on the hallway floor outside the unit. Inside was a folded piece of paper with large printed black letters ominously reading, "We're watching you." My pulse quickened reading the bizarre note, but living in London, you get somewhat desensitized to the odd. I wrote it off as misdelivered mail or a foolish prank by some neighborhood teen. Still, I double-bolted the door and peered through the peephole periodically throughout the day. That evening, another shrill ring of the doorbell made me jump. Creeping to the door, I looked through the peephole expecting to see a bored kid giggling outside. But the hallway was empty. Swinging the door open slowly, my stomach dropped. The same threatening note lay on the floor in the same spot as that morning. Someone had slipped it under the door when I wasn't looking. Now thoroughly rattled, I reported the incidents to the building security team and the police. But without photographic evidence or ability to pull prints, the authorities could only log my complaint but not intervene further. If it persists, call us again, they advised. I barely slept that night, wondering what menacing figure could be lurking in the dark keeping such close watch on me. Scrambling for answers, I scoured online neighborhood forums, seeking similar accounts of harassment. Nothing. The next few days I proceeded wearily, looking over my shoulder constantly when coming and going. But the only noteworthy occurrences were a few instances of my typically noisy upstairs neighbor's music fading in and out. Chalking it up to bored teenagers targeting random new move-ins for morbid thrills, I tried convincing myself the worst was over, until I'd arrived home from work one evening to find my front door mysteriously ajar. Fearing an intruder, I cautiously stepped inside. Nothing appeared stolen, but shocking jagged red graffiti was spray-painted across my living room wall. Jitaoui. Pulse pounding, I dialed 999 and waited outside for emergency services to clear and secure the unit. But they found no intruder, no signs of forced entry. With no theft, they again could only document the chilling incident in a report. They speculated it seemed an intimidation tactic by a disgruntled relative or acquaintance of the prior tenant. They advised changing the unit locks immediately. That harrowing night, too terrified to sleep, I scoured online self-defense forums seeking urgent solutions. But most reiterated that I should move to a new location entirely, starting over somewhere my address wasn't known. However, the cost and work of moving again so soon was overwhelming, and rents in the neighborhood had already risen further just since I'd signed my lease barely a month prior. Living alone anywhere else would stretch my tight budget to the brink. So instead, I tried to stand my ground, steadily documenting each odd occurrence in detail. More cryptic notes appeared wedged into my doorframe over the next week, making my skin crawl with violation. Late-night knocks and heavy footsteps in the hallway would rouse me, heart-hammering. But each time I'd leap up to peer through the peephole, the corridor sat empty. The unsettling activity seemed designed specifically to fray my nerves to the breaking point day and night. But having just gone through the chaos of moving, I was stubbornly determined not to be scared away from the home I'd worked so hard to secure. I changed the locks myself, added a heavy-duty bolt, installed motion sensor lights. I introduced myself to all neighbors, asking if they'd noticed any strange activity. All offered sympathetic ears, but no useful information. Over the next week, I withdrew most of my meager cash savings and stowed my most prized possessions at a friend's place, just in case. I also informed my aloof landlord about the disturbing threats, but she seemed largely unconcerned. I cursed myself for renting from such a negligent woman. I researched my rights to break the lease early, but found limited options. Still, I persisted, resolute in standing my ground. I made a copy of my key for a close friend to check in periodically when I was out. I kept my phone's camera roll bursting with evidence. Gradually, the unexplained harassment tapered off. The police increased patrols around my building, which seemed to deter the perpetrators. Given the nature of the occurrences, my friends speculated it was likely immature teenagers selecting random new move-ins to torment for morbid thrills. While deeply disturbing, looking back, I've chosen to think of it all as a senseless prank, albeit an extremely cruel one. The only lasting damage was to my vulnerable sense of safety and sanctuary in my first real home. After changing the locks, I repainted my vandalized wall a warm honey shade and focused my energy on decorating with optimism. I refused to cower and give in to malicious bullying. In the end, I held my ground and won back my peaceful new home. It took time to recover my shaken feeling of security after such an ominous invasion of my space. But standing my ground against the faceless intimidation tactics in the end bolstered my confidence. I'm grateful I stubbornly refused to become just another victim. Over a year later, I'm still happily settled into that cozy one-bedroom flat that I proudly call home. It turns out patience and courage can defeat unexplained cruelty. I'm right where I want to be. When my boyfriend Mark first suggested we move into a converted old church together, I'll admit I was hesitant. As someone who has never been religious, the idea of living in a house of worship seemed foreign to me. But the more Mark showed me pictures of the renovated church, the more intrigued I became. The soaring vaulted ceilings, intricate stained glass windows, and beautiful stone architecture imparted a sense of grandeur. The realtor described it as a heavenly oasis, and I started to see the appeal of residing in the divine dwelling despite not belonging to the faith. On move-in day, I stepped out of the car and gazed out at the towering steeple still perched proudly atop the slate roof, now bathed in the golden glow of sunset. I could hardly believe this unique structure would be our new home. As Mark and I carried boxes inside, I was awestruck by the spacious open concept layout inside. Sunbeams streaming through the colorful stained glass windows splashed kaleidoscopic designs across the floors. It felt somehow both cavernous yet cozy. We playfully christened the main living space the core rooms, since that's where worshippers once sang hymns together. The sizable master bedroom would be the rectory, and the large clawfoot tub the baptismal bath. After a pizza dinner atop the beautiful refinished altar that now served as our dining table, we felt like giddy kids playing house. The first night snuggled under fresh sheets in the shadow of the soaring ceiling and hulking wooden beams, it felt like we'd been blessed with a magical, if not slightly unconventional, new chapter. In the light of day, the quirks and flaws of converting a historic house of worship into a residential home became more obvious. The wall-mounted AC unit struggled valiantly to cool the vast open space with its towering ceilings. A fine layer of dust clung to the upper half of the arched, stained glass windows, too high up to easily reach and clean. We also discovered a small attic access door, barely noticeable, that when pulled down revealed rickety steps ascending narrowly to a cramped storage space filled with odd discarded relics from the church's past. Cleaning and modernizing our new divine dwelling would clearly take considerable work and creativity. But Mark and I were up for the challenge, settling into a fun routine of chipping away at projects and upgrades on weekends between our regular 9-to-5 jobs. Living day-to-day in a converted church took some getting used to as well. At first, the giant, hyper-realistic crucifix staring down ominously from above the kitchen sink as I did dishes gave me the creeps. We decided to repurpose it as lawn art, plunging it into the soft earth in the backyard to keep watch over the garden instead. I'd also occasionally hear the echo of heavy footsteps or faint singing resonating through the cavernous halls and vaulted chambers when home alone. Mark figured it was just the unique acoustics of the old structure, stone and slate carrying sound in odd ways. But to me, it felt unsettling, almost like remnants of past ceremonies and gatherings still hung in the air. At night, the peculiar occurrences increased. I'd hear scratching sounds from above the bedroom ceiling, too rhythmic to be raccoons in the roof. Lying there in the dark, I imagined a menacing presence lurking in the attic space. Other nights, I'd wake up to all our kitchen and bathroom cabinets mysteriously swung wide open. Mark brushed it off, assuming he must not have latched them fully the previous night. But the incidents happened repeatedly, and I knew there had to be a more sinister explanation than clumsiness. Something was making itself known. My greatest fear was confirmed after waking numerous mornings to the heavy wooden front door ominously cracked open, certain I had deadbolted it before bed. Mark finally agreed we should call in an expert to cleanse the spirit from the converted church. But following the ritual, the disturbances only seemed to increase. The giant crucifix Mark had mounted outside somehow reappeared, hanging above our bed despite his insistence he'd never moved it back inside. Belongings would go missing for days on end, only to resurface later in bizarre locations like the bathroom sink or freezer. Most terrifying was the violent shaking and shattering of our chandelier one evening while cozied up watching TV. The phantom haunting our holy home made it clear no priest could drive it out. In the end, we determined the only solution was to break the lease and leave the property for good. Neither of us felt safe there as the torment persisted. Given the sky-high ceilings, scrubbing the place spotless before moving took tremendous effort. Mark telephoned multiple contractors until he found help. In the meantime, we packed up belongings as hastily as possible, on edge at all times. Loading the final boxes and driving away from that unholy haunting was an enormous relief. The peaceful modern apartment we found still feels heavenly compared to the harrowing divine dwelling we escaped. Looking back, we learned you can't judge a book by its cover. Some stains run too deep to erase from the walls of a structure, no matter how beautiful on the surface. For our own sanity and safety, vacating the converted church was the only option after all attempts to cleanse it failed. Its sinister presence will await the next unsuspecting tenants. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.